So let's pay attention. Jesus, in walking along the Sea of Galilee, on that little pilgrim's boardwalk that you can walk on today, was walking right into the midst of a distressed economic landscape. You see, the ancient fishing industry depended on a number of things, one of which was wooden boats. Some of you maybe have taken the, when you were going down to Palestine, Israel with Sabil, when you're going down to see the Palestinian reality with Sabil, the Liberation Center based in Jerusalem. Emmanuel, you want to just raise your hand? We have the director of Friends of Sabil. Raise your hand, Emmanuel. Yes, he's the director of Sabil, Sweden. If you have questions, you want to know when the next group is going down, see it one more time, Emmanuel. Repetition is the key to pedagogy. So when you go on your next Sabil trip, you can visit this boat. It's a tourist attraction, although we're not supposed to really go because it's run by a kibbutz. But anyway, it's a really interesting archaeological find because it's a boat that has been carbon dated to the exact time that Jesus would have been in this area, and it's interesting because it's a wooden boat that shows signs of having been patched 5 different times with 5 different kinds of wood, which means these were poor fishermen who were just trying to keep their leaky boat afloat. And Jesus might have actually been of some good because as a tekton, he could help repair boats. Imagine Jesus doing some honest work. Awesome. This is a map of the Sea of Galilee. And it's an interesting map because what you see in the turquoise, these were all harbors all around the sea. They've been excavated to a different degree. And most of the harbors were built by the Romans right around the time of Jesus. And that tells us that the Sea of Galilee was under economic colonization. You see, Peter and James and Andrew and them, they were peasant fishermen. And their fathers and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers, as far back as anybody could remember, they were fishing sustainably in the Sea of Galilee, just catching enough to feed their families and have enough in the village and have a little for trade, the way in which traditional people all over the world still survive, whether that's growing a little maize or hunting in the forest, a sustainable peasant economy. But right around the time that the gospel is talking about, Rome moves in. And it moves in because Tiberias is now the new administrative center. And the reason Herod moved to Tiberias because the Romans wanted to structurally adjust the economy of the Sea of Galilee because it was a rich fishing area. And what they wanted to do, see if you've seen this movie before. They wanted to come in and restructure the economy to extract the fish and use it for export. Have you seen that movie? It's a very old movie. It's in black and white. And in order to do that, of course, they had to change the way in which the peasant fishermen operated. So I want to just briefly talk about 3 villages. I want to talk about Capernaum, and I want to talk about Magdala, and I want to talk about Tiberias just a little bit more. As I said, a new emperor ascended to the throne in Rome, and his name was Tiberius. So Herod goes, "Oh, great." And he runs off to Rome and says, "Can I please keep Galilee?" In fact, Jesus tells a parable about this. There was a king, and he went off to get power, and his people hated him. It's a Lucan parable. It's all about Herod Antipas. And Tiberius says, "Yes, Herod, you can keep driving your Rolls Royce and having your little palaces." And so he runs back and builds a new city and names it after the emperor. That's how power was consolidated. So clearly Tiberius was meant to project Roman economic and political hegemony over the Sea of Galilee. The year 19. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Jesus was 19 years old. Now, what that meant for peasant fishermen is that the fishing that was formerly done, as I said, for local consumption was now increasingly being used, taken for export. And that meant that it had to be smoked or ground into fish sauce and put into jars and put off into export. And sociologists of antiquity have been doing some interesting studies recently, and archaeology worked. Basically, but now you need a license, right? You had to buy a license. Not only did you have to buy a license, but you had to sell your catch to the local Roman administrators. And so you had to buy a license, and you had to now go to the local authorities to license your boat and pay for your boat, and your catch was determined by the market middlemen. And no wonder that these fishermen were losing ground fast, because their way of life was being destroyed. And that brings us to Magdala, a little fishing village halfway between Tiberias and Capernaum. And who came from Magdala? Yeah, Mary. Mary. And some people aren't too sure about Mary. They think she might have been Jesus' girlfriend, or they think she might have been not too sure about her way of life. Here's what we can know for sure about Mary of Magdala. She was probably a refugee from the fish factories, because Magdala was formerly known as Taricheia in Greek, which means processed fishville. In other words, it was a fish factory town. And Mary was probably attracted to Jesus because word got out, here comes this organizer, and he's talking about an alternative society, and he's talking to us folk who are being oppressed by the imperial fishing industry. That's why Mary finds her way to Jesus from Fish Factoryville. And so everybody converges in Capernaum. It was a very strategic place. It was one of the bigger ports on the northwest side of the sea. Very important center of the fishing trade, and that, of course, is where Jesus calls the first disciples, Simon and Andrew. The fact that they're brothers would not have been a surprise, because in order to get a fishing license from the new regime, they didn't give out individual licenses. They only gave licenses to small cooperatives, usually run by families. And so it's no surprise that we have a family enterprise here working together. It was called a koinonoi. You've heard that term, koinonia. It was just a little family enterprise. And so we meet Simon and Andrew, and they're casting their nets. Well, again, just to be clear about the fact that we're not in Disneyland, there were three types of fishing employed by Galilean peasants. One was seine net casting, and some of this you'll remember from traditional Scandinavian fishing, where they put out the big net and draw it in. We actually have a parable in Matthew about that. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. And when it was full, the fishermen pulled it to the shore and sat down and sorted the fish. That's exactly what fishermen would have been doing in the first century, sorting the fish. But whereas before you sorted the fish according to what is kosher and what is not, now you're sorting the fish, 1 for Rome, 2 for Rome, 3 for Rome, 4 for Rome, 1 for the family, 5 for Rome, right? You're sorting the fish, and it's not working out for you. Another kind of fishing still done among peasant fishermen around the world, of course, is free net casting, and that's quite possibly what Simon and Andrew were doing. And then the fourth kind is the kind done usually at night, where you pull around the trammel net. Some of these nets were very complicated, so Simon and Andrew are casting their net, and then the next couple of fishermen are repairing their nets. In other words, Mark is trying to tell us that these aren't superheroes being recruited, and these aren't angelic beings. These are hard-pressed poor fishermen, and their world is crashing down on them. So at this moment, of all the people Jesus could have gone to recruit, Jesus goes to the people who were falling furthest down the ladder in the real world. There's a couple of interesting quotations in the literature of antiquity. One is from the Roman poet Cicero. You remember Cicero? He was one of the elite scholars from Oxford. And he wrote about life. And Cicero said, "The most shameful occupations are butchers, cooks, poultry farmermen, and fishermen. Those are shameful occupations." Now this is being written by someone who probably enjoys eating fish and chicken. You see the class despising? Or take a papyrus from Egypt around this same time. The fisherman, said the Egyptian witness, is more miserable than any other profession. Not because that was always true, but because that was becoming true with the structural adjustment at the time that Jesus is acting. So I want you to imagine Tiberias no longer as the capital of Disneyland, but rather as ground zero in this Romanizing project of domination. And up the coast, Capernaum is a village being profoundly impacted by these sorts of policies. So if you want to begin a social movement of renewal and resistance, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the place where people feel the pain the most. You're going to start at the bottom. Just to try to use an analogy, which I think is sometimes helpful, if you're Gandhi, you're going to work with the poorest, and you're going to put your finger on an economic issue that everybody feels. So the turning point in Gandhi's career was the Salt March of 1930. And he took the issue of salt because salt was everywhere in India. People had been using salt for thousands of years. They gathered it on the salt flats and along the shore, and they traded. But the British Empire, to colonize India, suddenly said, "We own the salt, and now you have to import salt. You have to buy British salt," just as the Romans were doing with fish. And the fish thing is close to my heart because I worked with Native people in the Pacific Islands for many years on indigenous sovereignty issues. And what would typically happen is an American corporation or a Japanese corporation or a Taiwanese corporation come into the Pacific Islands, they industrially fish the area, take it back, industrially can the fish, and then send it back to the Pacific Islands, so that people who used to catch a fish and prepare it now have to go to the store and eat canned fish taken in their waters and processed in Taiwan. It's crazy. That's what the British were doing in India. So Gandhi, he says, "Friends, this isn't rocket science. Let's go get some salt." So he starts out in Ahmedabad, and he only has a few dozen supporters, starts walking, skinny little Gandhi. And as he walks, more and more people join, more and more people join. So by the time they get to Dandi, there are thousands of people walking, poor people who had nothing else to turn to. And the one thing they could do was walk. So they walked with Gandhi with nothing else, no arms, no weapons, just walking. And they get to the sea, and Gandhi simply reaches down picks up a handful of salt. That's powerful.